have a small audience in the room, so we're not just talking to ourselves. We will be monitoring the chat, so if you want to put questions in the chat, we'll keep an eye on them. That's probably the best way. Is that okay, Andrew? And then there'll be time for more interaction later. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Matthew Williamson. I'm the head of the Centre for Excellence in Learning and Teaching here at UEL, and I'm really pleased to welcome Dr. Andrew Struan from the University of Glasgow, which is my old stamping ground. Andrew is the Writing and Study Skills Coordinator at Glasgow. That is still your title, isn't it?
For now, it's changing, but for now.
Oh! At Glasgow, and is a Herald Scotland Award winner, Times Higher Education Awards shortlisted. Well, not just him, the team, but and Andrew's going to talk to us today about academic literacies for all. I think it's going to be a really interesting session, and I'm just going to hand over to Andrew. And hope the camera follows him and not me.
It's now on the sandwiches, so that's...
It'll probably pick you up and then it should follow you back.
Yeah, we'll see. Okay, so I will keep talking and hopefully the camera will move. There we go. Okay, so thank you very much for coming along. Thank you for having me. What I'm going to talk about today is some of the work that we've done at the University of Glasgow and the way in which we've tried to frame our curriculum around an academic literacies framework. So I thought I would start by having a quote because my background is in history and I'm a historian. I went a little bit further back in time than I would normally go here, but what I wanted to try and start us with thinking about is this idea of students and students' abilities in writing, in reading, in academic literacies more generally. And when I was looking at this, I tried to go as far back as possible in time to get the oldest quote I could find. And so what we have here is a quote from Egbert of Liege from 1023-ish, complaining about students. So complaining about students being lazy, complaining about students not engaging, complaining about students not wanting to participate in education. Egbert is also the first source that we have of the Little Red Riding Hood. So that's him. So as we looked at that, then that kind of this why can't kids write, dumbing down our kids, our students can't write, universities in England are failing because we will not assess their reading and their writing. And then I should have given a content warning, but there's something from the Daily Mail here about that even if you can't spell, you can still get a first because we're ignoring apparently these student attributes. So this idea then of us failing our students is not new. And this idea of our students failing us in some ways is also not new. It's been going on for a long time. What I wanted to focus on though instead was, well, where do we sit with this now? If this is a lot of the discussion that happens in the newspaper, is that actually what we see with our students, and what do we do to engage with that? So how do we engage with this? So this idea of students and their study skills, and I put that in, even though it's my job title at the moment, I put it in scare quotes because we're going to talk a bit about how that works. So this idea of study skills in the UK was really born out of the expansion of the university sector in the 1990s, especially as we expanded into the UK, especially into areas where we wouldn't normally have had students coming into higher education. So this idea of student learning or the development of student skills more generally, really in the UK was born out through the 1990s. We had, however, no standardization across the Anglophone world. So in the United States, they've tended to adopt either a writing across the curriculum, a WAC model, or a writing in the disciplines, WID model. They tend to be delivered by English literature or English language departments, maybe through writing centres in the United States. And there's a long, very, very long pedagogical history in the United States of WAC and WID. In the UK, we didn't have that, we don't have that. What we have instead is this approach to study skills, or what we had was this approach to study skills. This tended to be born out of a need to meet non-traditional students, meet this idea of topping up students. So we had this idea of students having a kind of a deficit model. These new students from non-traditional backgrounds that we were bringing in supposedly lacked the skills or lacked the abilities to succeed at university. It was kind of the approach to this idea of study skills. There was this kind of top-up, top-on, add-on type thing that the university could add to these students to get them to come up to where we expected them to be. That also then focused on the skills lacked by especially particular groups of students. So as we expanded out through widening participation programs, as we expanded out into non-traditional groups of students, to international students, again, the kind of topping up the skills of students. What we replaced that with, however, was academic literacies. So this is the kind of 1990s, early 2000s. And the view here was very much that deficit model of students lacking a thing, students not being able to do a thing that we expect them to do because they come from a background that we don't expect, or because they come from an academic culture that we don't expect.
Yeah, someone tried to use that to control the slide.
You just want to share it again, Mel.
I need to go to share again. PowerPoint live. I can browse my computer, and then it wasn't down there. Great. Yeah, control of the slides. I don't know. You can resume.
Okay, so yeah, we had this idea of this topping up these skills lacked by particular groups. Academic literacies, which is not new, so it's first discussed by Lee and Street in 1998, comes along and says, in essence, that deficit model isn't the right approach. That's not what we want. And we've got this idea of study skills, or these surface skills that students need to develop, and that there are quick fixes in order to be able to do that. So you put on a class on grammar, and then suddenly everybody in that class now understands grammar, understands how to use grammar, and are prolific users of the semicolon. That doesn't work. The model on top of that then is academic socialization. So this is an idea of this quick fix doesn't work. So instead there's academic socialization, where we have this idea of acculturation into an academic subject or an academic discourse, so that students are able to acclimate themselves into that discourse through a socialization, through engagement with the topic of discussion. And then academic literacies, it tends to be the model that learning developers take now, is this idea of meaning making and understanding relevant constructions of knowledge. So instead of it being this quick fix for our students to be able to understand concepts or ideas, instead of just asking students to socialize as part of the academic subject or discourse. What we have instead is this idea of literacies of being a meaning-making process for students. Students engage.
I know this. I know what this is. I don't know if this is working or not.
So
Just be careful if you're online, do the setting.
No.
Manage the process. Just if you're online, just don't make any changes to the program, please.
okay, so what we have then is this idea of social practices where student learning, student writing, student engagement with any of their academic content is all about their identity within that subject, rather than this idea of just socializing students into a norm or giving them the skills, topping up the skills that they need. And all academic literacies work then is around about this idea of a discourse and power, of students taking part in that discourse, of students engaging with that discourse, and students understanding the relationships of different elements within the academic discussion, the academic debate around about their topic. What we have then as well is that this idea of genres, fields, and disciplines. And what an academic literacies approach to student education tries to do is explain to students the genre, the field, the discipline that they're working in, and giving the tools to engage with those genres, those fields, those disciplines, and give them the tools to understand the identities that they carry when they are working in each individual subject, each individual field or discipline, and then try to demystify those fields, those disciplines. So the challenge with that, however, is that doing that centrally, so my team and I sit centrally in the University of Glasgow, doing that centrally is really, really difficult. You are trying to do this for every single student in an individualized way. You're trying to do this for every single student through for the variety of all the subjects that exist. And so the challenge here is being able to get an inclusive model, or the most inclusive model possibly, that can reach all students, that can engage with and engage all students. And we can do that through this idea of the experience of dealing with specific academic tasks and then feedback on that experience. And that's the crucial part for this idea of this dialogue, this understanding of the relationship between the student and the discourse, the student and the field, is this idea of taking part in it, contributing to it, and then getting feedback on that process. So what we had in 2006 was a rather dismal prediction from Ursula Wingate, saying that it's especially unlikely that any research-intensive institution, which attracts a large percentage of those traditional students, would ever see the need to promote learning. I thankfully disagree with that and can say that because of those changes in global higher education since then, and the leaps that we've made forward in technology, we have a program that covers the entire student body at a research-intensive university in Scotland, which just happens to be the University of Glasgow, which is where I am. So, as a university, so you can kind of see the setting. University of Glasgow is a research institution in Glasgow, Scotland. We have a very high, an unusually high percentage of local and commuting students for a Russell Group university. About 40% of our undergraduate body are local students to Glasgow. We also have an unusually high number of students from widening participation backgrounds for a Russell Group institution. In Scotland, we have a thing called MD20 and MD40, which is multiple deprivation 20, multiple deprivation 40. And they're the 20 and 40 poorest postcodes in Scotland. And we take a very, very high number of those students in. We also have, at the same time, a very large international student body, especially our postgraduate taught level. And we follow the Scottish 4-year undergraduate degree. So unlike in England, where the degrees tend to be 3 years, there are 4 years. We do 2 years sub-honours and then 2 years of honours. And we have very, very, very large numbers of postgraduate taught students. I think this year the number of postgraduate taught students overtook our undergraduate students in terms of numbers, and they tend to be international in origin. Where I sit then within that is Matthew's old stomping ground, as he said, the Learning Enhancement and Academic Development Service, which is everybody calls Leeds, which is confusing when you say you're from Leeds. People don't understand that you're from Glasgow, but also from Leeds. But we as a department exist to support and enhance student success across the institution. So we're there to support and enhance students at all stages, so from pre-entry the whole way through to PGR, to develop effective learning, effective teaching practices and effective people. And that's our core goals. We do that in my team through work with interdisciplinary teams of learning developers. So there's me and my boss, we're the two learning development managers. We then have Glasgow is split up into 4 colleges. We have broadly subject aligned, college specific effective learning advisors. We have international writing advisors. We have a postgraduate research student writing advisor. We have 2 Royal Literary Fund fellows. I have a team of, it's now about 38 graduate teaching assistants today who work with me across and work with the rest of the team across that. And then we have a maths and a stats advisor. And then what we do is run what I still think is the UK's largest academic writing course. I haven't seen anybody that can compete us on numbers, and I'll talk about numbers in a minute. But we run the UK's largest academic writing course. We offer programs of classes the entire year round on things like academic writing, academic development, writing for dissertations, dissertation research, a range of online provision, including apps, web-based resources, online programs, and so on. Year-round one-to-one provision for anything to do with learning development, academic development, and in-course teaching on almost, and the almost is in brackets because we're nearly there, but almost all university courses. So the focus then, or what I want to talk about for the next 10 minutes or so, is AWSP, the academic writing. So this is that UK's largest writing course. The way that AWSP works is it's compulsory for every incoming undergraduate and every incoming postgraduate taught student at the University of Glasgow. When Matthew and I many years ago started this, we had about 8,000 students completing it per year. We're up to 16,000 students this year. So we provide feedback to and assess 16,000 students each year. AWSP is compulsory. Every student has to do it, and every student does it in the same way at the same time. Students are informed of this as they matriculate, as they go through Freshers Week, and students complete the course within the first 3, sometimes 4 weeks of their first semester. The way this works is everything is done via Moodle. This is, for most of our students, especially undergraduate, the first experience with Moodle. This is their first time ever using a VLE. That's starting to change as schools adopt more kind of online learning. But for a big majority of our students, this is their first experience of using a VLE. So we keep the VLE for AWSP as simple as possible. Students are given basically 3 blocks to work through. Each block then gives them navigation information on what they're expected to do. Students can work through this at their own pace, at their own time. We give students the information they need to be able to build up an answer bank to a range of multiple choice questions, and then write a short essay, so about 500 to 1,000 words long of an essay. They then submit that essay, and the team of graduate teaching assistants that I was talking about then assess that work. The way in which we do this assessment is, again, all via Moodle. Most of the assessment is done by the GTAs tapping in a number on Moodle, which auto-generates a range of feedback. So we use Moodle Quiz for this. I say all of that with saying that we've got 36 GTAs. We had 16,000 essays this September. The task is a mammoth task. So students get 2 types of feedback on this. They get that auto-generated feedback that is generated by the GTAs tapping in a number, and then the GTAs tap in a sentence or 2 of personalised feedback to that student. The idea behind the feedback is that it's all developmental. So students do all of this before their first assessed summative pieces of work. And the GTAs themselves are all trained in things like grammar, academic writing, online assessment practice, and are given this marking rubric to follow. What that then looks like from the student's perspective is that they receive this tailored, targeted feedback on their academic writing before their first semester. So they get feedback on what they're doing well, to improve, all before those first summative assessments. And they're given guidance, they're given further resources, they're given links and recommendations to us as a team, again, all before those first summative deadlines. The process for this then is students sit the diagnostic exercise, they submit the piece of work, they answer those multiple choice questions, and they get immediate feedback on the multiple choice questions, and then they submit the essay. The GTAs then mark that essay, provide feedback on that essay, using that standardized rubric, using some of the standardized feedback plus some personalized feedback. And then from that, students have 3 exit pathways out of AWSP. The majority of our students will be referred to optional further developmental resources, optional further developmental courses, but from the purposes of AWSP, those students have passed and are finished. A middle group of about 20-ish% of our student body is referred to an online course, an entirely asynchronous online course that they complete via Moodle. They're given the entire semester to do this. It's about 6 to 8 hours of teaching time is the idea, but students can work through it at their own pace, self-check, using things like H5P on Moodle, using Lesson on Moodle, and they can work through all of this as they go along. The smaller group then are referred to compulsory face-to-face or Zoom face-to-Zoom face at the moment classes. These classes run for 2 weeks. In Glasgow semesters of week 4 and 5, most courses have a deadline of week 6. So we do all of this before their courses, submission deadlines, and they run for 2 weeks. There's 2 hours of classes, and students there are taken through this academic literacies embedding framework of understanding assessment criteria at Glasgow and understanding what it is that we are looking for and how they can then engage with that. The idea behind the classes isn't to be a catch-all or a fix-all. It's not possible to do that. But what the classes are designed to do is give students a lot of the tools with which to then engage with their academic discourse, engage with their academic discussion. All of this is broken down into subject relevant and subject aligned content. So we have different essay questions for every subject at the university, more or less. Students can pick whatever they want. They can pick to write an essay in their own subject. They can pick to write an essay in if they studied history at high school and they want to write another history essay, then great. Even if they're doing biology, that's fine. It doesn't actually really matter. They can pick what they want. Most of them will pick the essays from their own schools and subject areas. What we then have after that is this idea of the focus on intended learning outcomes. And this is where we really try and get the students to understand what it is that we want of them. We divide the course up into those subject areas, as I was talking about, but we also divide it up into undergraduate and postgraduate taught. And the focuses of those two cohorts are very different. Our undergraduates, most of the time, will be ones that have mislearned things in school, been mistold things in school, perhaps that don't apply in university settings. At postgraduate taught level, it's much more about an academic culture and academic culture acclimatization process. And then at the end of this process, for these students referred to the classes, they write and submit another piece of essay, another essay, another piece of written work to us, and then that's provided with much more detailed, specific feedback. So that's AWSP. AWSP has been running compulsory in the University of Glasgow since 2018. We are now starting to change and move beyond that kind of standard model or standard format for all. So we started this year, for example, a new course called Transition to Glasgow, T2G. And this was a pre-entry course for all incoming undergraduate students. So we had about 5,000 incoming undergraduate students this year. We offered this course to them all. The course was essentially a semester's worth of teaching time compacted down into 2 really intensive weeks before the start of semester. So we did it, if week 0 is freshers week, we did it in weeks -4 and -3. So just before they started with us at the university. Students were provided with a core academic literacies module, and then 2 electives, so 2 broadly subject aligned electives, and they could pick whichever ones they wanted. So we had electives like the history of argument, we had a history of the greatest scientific debates, we had murder in the lab, how to use analytical chemistry to solve murders, we had medieval history, we had using game studies to understand critical debate, a whole variety of topics that the students do. At the end of that, students submit a written assessment to one of those electives, and they receive from that feedback again on their work from their tutor and get their AWSP credit. So in essence, they're getting their AWSP course out of the way in advance. When we did some feedback on this, we found that the scientists, to massively generalize, the scientists were really keen to get AWSP out the way, and that was a big motivation for the scientists as to why they did this. The folks in arts and social sciences were much more about, I want to take part in a community, I wanted to learn how to do things, blah, blah. So it was interesting seeing that strategic focus from the scientists there. We had, at the end, so we offered this to about 4,500 students, and we had 800 students complete it. It's, again, entirely optional, but 800 students complete the whole process here of submitting the work at the end. It was really, really, really good fun, and the students had from feedback, the students had a really genuinely good time, and I think this will now just be part of the University of Glasgow's offering. It was a pilot this year. We're just waiting to see whether funding is approved for the next year. Other changes to this is through the pandemic, the university adopted a Duolingo language qualification, and we were tasked with putting together a semester-long course for students coming in with particular Duolingo language qualifications. The course is 4 hours of asynchronous contact and 1 hour of synchronous contact per week for a semester. Again, the idea behind this is that it's a compulsory language module. In essence, it's called a language module. It's actually, again, an academic literacies module for these students. So it's acknowledging that the Duolingo courses may not have best prepared them for studying in English at the university, and so they're on this course. It's all, again, based on the academic literacies approach of academic acclimatization, yes, academic understanding, yes, but about getting students to engage with the discourses that's happening around them. And again, it's subject aligned, so we split it up into the different subjects. We had last year about 900 students complete this. This year there were fewer Duolingo students coming in, so the numbers are slightly lower this year. We had about 900 students go through this last year. And then the last thing, just before I stop, is our shift to credit-bearing provision. So we are adopting things like micro-credentials and academic literacies as we continue to expand the ways in which we move beyond just AWSP. So moving beyond that kind of standard format for everybody to give students different pathways and different options to engage. So we've got courses already like the history of argument, which is 9, linguistics of academic language, key thinkers in education, communicating scientific thinking, and then intercultural collaboration. So what we're trying to do with all of this is, again, underpin everything with this academic literacies model of engaging students with their own studies, engaging students with their own studies in their subjects, but using this academic literacies model of trying to teach students the discourses, the language, the linguistic approaches of what is happening around about them in order for that to enable them to then take part in that, in order to enable them to take part in the discourses that are happening in their subject areas. And so us as a central team have this question that we continue to ask ourselves: are we where we should be with this yet? So if we say that academic literacies as a concept was born in 1998-ish with Lee and Street, that's not yesterday. Are we where we should be with this? And for us, I think the answer is no. But I think I hope we're making steps in the right kind of direction. And that's me. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting. We've had quite a few questions while you were talking.
Okay.
So I'm just going to start from the first one, although I think that Matthew may have answered
I think
it.
I answered one. Sorry, I didn't
Yeah.
see your message.
That's fine. But yeah, so someone asked if the AWSP is credit bearing, and if not, in what ways it is. Is it compulsory?
Yeah, okay, so it's 0 credit. So it's currently not credit bearing, although we're probably going to change that into B credit bearing. But it's recorded on all student transcripts, and it's a condition of their registration with us at Glasgow. So it's not credit bearing at the moment because it's meant to be that developmental kind of stress-free or limited stress feedback opportunity, but it's a condition of the registration and it's recorded. So whether a student completes the program or not is recorded on their transcript. I don't ever say this to students, but if it's recorded that they haven't completed, it doesn't do anything. It's just there on their transcript. But that's not the message we say to students.
Okay. Yeah, I think that answers also the question that Jonathan has. Next one is, what happens if a student fails to complete the compulsory ones?
So, yeah.
Next question is from Paul. It says, given that the focus of academic literacies is to deploy linguistic practices appropriate to the student's own discipline, how is this reconciled with everybody writing an essay when they may only be required to write, for example, lab reports in year 1?
Yeah, so we accommodate for that. So students can write there's one of the questions in maths, for example, is about mathematical annotation, and using that. We've got lab reports for chemistry. We've got intelligence briefings for social and political studies. The types of this, we call it an essay in the broadest sense, because it's always a written piece. But what students do within that is actually really, really different, depending on what they're kind of doing in their subjects.
Okay. Next question is from Yanis. What is the background and qualifications in terms of prior knowledge of the 800? I think this was the getting to Glasgow or transition to Glasgow. So what's their background and qualifications of the students that completed the course of those 800?
So they were all undergraduates. So where they came from was a variety of different places. We had a really high, so that MD20, MD40, the widening participation groups that I was talking about, we had a really high uptake from those groups, which was great. But outside of that, it was just a kind of a spread across our normal incoming undergrad cohort.
Okay. Next question from Chrissy, I think. Is the Duolingo project for students with multilingual abilities?
Yes, so Duolingo is, the university adopted Duolingo as a language entry requirement because IELTS centres shut through the pandemic. So it was a kind of bluntly an emergency response to the closure of the IELTS courses, or the IELTS testing centres. And so the Duolingo is a language qualification for folks coming in who don't have any other form of language qualification. And we use that as their pass, in essence.
Next question from Emma, which I think is also my question, so I'm going to steal your question, Emma. She says, first of all, thank you, such an accomplishment. How did you get the whole university on board with the whole institution approach, and how long did it take?
My question.
So how long did it take? A decade and more, I think, is the answer. So AWSP, if we just speak about that, AWSP was born in our English Literature department initially. It was a local learning, teaching, development fund project, which was piloted for a year in 2004, I think, 2004, 2005. It was then expanded out across the then Faculty of Arts, which was one of our what's now the College of Arts, and one of our 4 colleges. In 2012, it was removed from the College of Arts and given to us centrally, my team, as we were at that point, Student Learning Service, which is when I joined the department. And then we ran it as a compulsory course in the College of Arts, in medicine and in physics level 1 and in law, with kind of pockets of expansion. And that kind of went on from 2012 until 2016, where we made a bid, again, Matthew and I and some colleagues made a bid to say, okay, if we're running this,
We'll tell you the room number on the confirmation email, and we'll see you on Wednesday the 12th. Okay.
I will, somebody's getting an appointment. Yeah, so in 2016, we bid centrally to be able to run this compulsorily across the entire institution, and got it. I think, surprisingly, I don't think we anticipated to get. I think we thought we would, or in my head, I thought we would get it for all undergraduates, but the university said no, go for all undergraduates and postgraduate taught students.
If I can just intervene just briefly. So the reason that it was a big piece of work to get it through University Learning and Teaching Committee, but the main reason that we were able to, so we bid for just shy of £250,000 additional budget a year to run this programme full time, including making Andrew's post dedicated to running it in the first instance. And the main reason we got the money was because we could show very clearly there was an improvement, particularly at postgraduate taught level, in progression and retention of students. And it was very much seen that there was and for the also for the MD20 students, I don't know we even looked so much for the MD40 students, but the MD20 students and international postgraduates, it made a significant difference in terms of progression. We had a lot of, particularly post-Chinese international students at PGT dropping out at Christmas, and particularly in certain schools, which I won't name. And it really did have an appreciable effect on that. And interestingly, when we took the paper to Learning and Teaching Committee, we only bid for undergraduates, and they were the ones that insisted that we make it compulsory for everybody, which was a bit of a shock. So yeah, it then became very much this is a Glasgow thing, and this is how we now do induction into Glasgow. And the other thing I should say is we were really surprised at how many, given that it is compulsory, but you don't really have any checks and balances. I think the first year we got 94% of the students did it and passed, and about 96% I think engaged. And I think that's just because they do it so early in their course, they haven't worked out that they don't have to yet. But that's me being cynical.
Yeah, I also saw that question come up on the screen about levels of engagement. It sits about 95, 96%. I think this year is our biggest year ever with 16,000 students. I think at the moment we're looking like we're on track to maybe 97, 98% completion. But that's very much an I think, because I don't know yet for sure, but I think this might be our highest ever engagement.
I should say, Andrew says it's the biggest writing course. I think outside the OU, it's probably the biggest formal course anywhere in the UK.
I think so, yeah.
Most students doing one course.
It presents a whole bunch of admin challenges, our student record systems and so on. The maximum that it can take is 999 students in one block. So no course is supposed to be above 999 students. So figuring these types of things out in the background has been an interesting challenge. We also had our IT services, and have every year our IT services panicking at us about the fact that we will knock over Moodle. It hasn't happened yet, but one day maybe.
Okay, got some comments, and then I'll combine a couple of questions. Comment comes from Ella, who works in the library here at UEL. Says, interesting if you feel that you're not where you need to be, and you already have one of the largest academic writing programs. I wonder where this leaves other institutions. So that's just a comment. Then a couple of questions, people asking in terms of feedback from students and also feedback from lecturers,
So student feedback. Student feedback on AWSP tends to be really genuinely very positive. They value, I'll put this in two camps. Students, the majority of student feedback is very positive in that they value getting the feedback, and they value the, the opportunity for this kind of dipping their toes in the water without it affecting their grades, especially at postgraduate level. We get that a lot from our postgraduates where they're very keen, they're postgraduates, they want to figure out exactly what it is that we want them to be able to do. So that we get really genuinely positive feedback from that. The classes especially get really, really positive feedback. So the classes we kept, so when Matthew was talking about the bid for money there, what we did was keep the class sizes really small. So the class sizes themselves never go above about 15, 17 students. And we wanted that because we wanted that individual relationship between the AWSP tutor and the students. For most of these students, especially undergraduate level, most of these students, that will be the first sustained contact they have with any tutor. They might have had one or two seminars or one or two tutorials, but their AWSP tutor is their first sustained contact. So the feedback on the classes is exceptional, and I can only praise the GTAs that do the teaching of that for doing that. Their dedication and their commitment is what makes that so such a positive experience. Where the students complain is timeframes. So it is a short period of time on purpose. We try and give students, I will contact students on day 1 of week 0, so freshers week for us, and tell them at that point, hey, you owe me an essay, hi. But I try and then give them normally 3 weeks to do that, with the caveat of that it shouldn't take them more than about an hour and a half to complete all of the work. So it's not a big ask. That tends to be the source of student complaint until they realize that I'm saying, you've got 3 weeks, it will take you about an hour and a half. and that tends to, people tend to be okay at that point. But that tends to be the kind of the biggest source of initial grumbles, I think is a phrase I would use.
I'm going to swap the order of questions a bit just because you mentioned the GTAs. So I've got a question from Pinar. How do you recruit or train your GTAs, and are they able to provide discipline-specific feedback on student writing?
Exactly that, yes. So GTAs come from across the institution. They are all PhD students. So in order to be a GTA with us, they must be studying for a PhD at the University of Glasgow or within 3 years of having completed a PhD at the University of Glasgow. So we take them, we split them into two very broad teams, arts and social sciences on one hand, and the sciences and medical sciences on the other hand, and we keep the teams as broad as possible across the subject areas that we have in order for them to be able to provide that subject specific things. So if I think of the AWSP classes for students in the sciences, for example, over the years we have built up banks of examples, questions and resources now from every possible science subject that students can study. And so that even if their tutor doesn't come from mechanical engineering, say their tutor's from physics, there are still banks of information and resources there on what writing looks like in that subject. We didn't have that initially. That's been built up over time.
Okay. A question or a comment from Alistair. He says, overall, this seems great. I wonder if the compulsory aspect was in conflict with an academic literacies approach, particularly in light of what you say about science students getting it over with.
Yes.
Is there a risk of encouraging instrumental approaches in students and then resenting having to do this?
Yeah.
I don't think there's a better approach, and doing this at this scale is amazing. He's just curious.
Yeah, so I sit very much on that line as well, between the whole point in academic literacies is enabling students to engage with the discourses that's happening around about them in their subject areas. Forcing them to do that is an uncomfortable, in some ways, an uncomfortable scenario. I think what allows me to continue to love this, and what allows me to continue to really value this, is the feedback that we get from students. And that's the bit where I think, okay, I know we're forcing them to do this. In some ways, we're leading them to the water. We're showing them how to drink the water. We're saying the water is delicious. Please engage with drinking the water, and then hopefully we can go from there. And so the student feedback has really helped. And then the engagement that we continue to see from students. So AWSP is kind of the first point of contact with us. The engagement that we continue to see with students through the rest of the year in everything else that we do is very, very high. And so that allows us that nice test of saying, okay, cool, we've done this compulsory thing. You don't hate us, you're still coming back. But I agree entirely with the line of that question.
Do you get to?
I would also say, sorry, intervening again, I think the fact that it doesn't start from a deficit model, it starts with a diagnostic, and if you do well, that could be it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think fits into that idea. It's not, we don't think you can write, so this is what so there are a couple of other, or there have been a couple of other compulsory courses around the university, but they're very much around universities. But for instance, I think it was math, I can't remember, had one which was very much about, you will not plagiarise, and we assume you will plagiarise and we'll train you not to. And I think that, whereas the AWSP approach is very much show us what you can do, show us where you are, and we will then support you. We will then help you to engage. And the other thing I would say, because Andrew won't say this because it's too blowing their own trumpet, when we made AWSP compulsory, and also there was a Moodle change, but we went from having 10 to 15 people in a class to 80 to 100 people in a class. And that's in the optional developmental classes that are run by the team after AWSP. And it got to the stage where room bookings at the university hated us because we were asking for all the big rooms in the university at one point. But it really did make an enormous difference in terms of student engagement with the developmental activities that Andrew's team run. So it's not just that I really don't think the students see it as, oh, this is a one and done model. And correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, but the year I left, which is now 2 years ago, just about, I think we had something like 85% of the students in the university had engaged with Andrew's team outside AWSP. So we're still and Glasgow's about twice the size of UEL, about 28,000 students. So we're talking about 20-something thousand students at some point or another engaging with SLD after AWSP. So it really does, I think, get students involved in that developmental process.
Thing on my behalf, but yeah, I think the pandemic as well has really impacted on that. So those 250 seater lectures that we had to adopt have continued to grow. So we use Zoom at the University of Glasgow, which has normally a 500 max capacity in any one Zoom, and we break that repeatedly. We have more than 500 students joining at any.
I think you answered the question about the deficit model, so thank you. The next question is from Angela. Is how do you think this might be delivered from within the discipline by or with the academics to embed the praxis?
So we also had that discussion, and that tends to be a lot of the time the model that is adopted in the US, where there's much more kind of local development of that. My challenge to that is, I think learning development is a subject in and of its own right, and I think you can be very good at teaching your subject, but that is very different from teaching academic literacies and teaching learning development. So I know there's always that pressure of saying, can we bring this further into the subjects? I don't agree with that fundamentally. I think that there is space to be able to teach students the things that they need to be able to know how to do to then apply that to the subject. With the caveat of this is always done in collaboration and in partnership with the subject areas. So when we're writing new essay questions, for example, I'll speak with the subject areas around about that. We report back to the subject areas, student results, student engagement. The subject areas have full oversight's not the right word. They have full visibility of what happens in AWSP. So it's truly collaborative, but I stick to that. Learning development and academic literacies is different from teaching a subject area, I think.
Yeah, thank you. We have another question in terms of formal evaluation, and if you evaluate the effectiveness of the program on subsequent student performance within their course.
So,
and if so, how?
So there's two points to this answer. So the first form of evaluation is around about how students perform based on their incoming attributes. So we, as Matthew was talking about, we look at things like MD20, MD40, we look at students coming in with prior degrees, we look at where students have come from, we look at students coming in from so articulating into a new year, so coming into our second or our third year. We look at all that data and we compare the students' results on AWSP with where they've come from. So we use that data as a way of kind of sense checking almost how our students are performing as they come in. What we can see from that is international students who have studied their first, international postgraduate students who have studied their first degree at another British institution do worst. Whatever it is we're doing to our undergraduates in their first 3 or 4 years when they're international students, we're de-skilling them, I guess is the word I want to use. They perform worse consistently. They perform the worst as a cohort. MD20, MD40 is the other one. So we've got that kind of evaluation almost, or that data set. I realize it's not evaluation, but that data set of what our students look like as they come in. We haven't yet done a full evaluation of tracking students in that way. We will this year start to do that. But the challenge that we have had is we have no control group. So what we had initially planned to do was have a group of students that had done AWSP, a large group of students that had done AWSP, and then another group that had not. But because the university just jumped with everybody at once, we have no control group to compare them against, which makes it difficult. But we do have a whole bunch of trackers and tracers on student data, different engagement types and different student results. So, for example, so we have Glasgow International College is our pre-sessional language course college, and we track those students to see how they have done in their pre-sessional course, how they did on AWSP, and then where they perform as they go through their degree. So we haven't done a full evaluation of everybody yet because it's many thousands of students, but we target particular cohorts and are able to then track them. And the results there show that AWSP is a really good predictor of final outcomes. And so what we then can do is use that to then go back to the start and say, okay, what do we need to do for these students coming in at the start so that they then have success as they go along?
The one thing that we did notice when we first went compulsory was that non-engagement with AWSP was the biggest predictor of dropping out of anything, even if they passed their first assignment. If they hadn't engaged with AWSP at the beginning, they were more like, they're not all, but they were much more likely to drop out than anybody else. And one of the things that we were trying to do, and I don't know if it was ever possible, was to try and get an early warning out to course leaders so that they could contact students, because it is all done within the first 4 weeks. So you've got a very early opportunity to say, look, you've already not engaged with the one thing we've asked you to do. Are you really serious about being here? I think that was probably more true for undergraduates than postgraduates, wasn't it? But that was the one, big, as Andrew says, originally, our original plan when we rolled it out was to go slightly more slowly so we could do this evaluation, but the university based, interestingly, the Dean for Science and Engineering said, well, it's not fair if some students get it and some don't, and it's proved to be beneficial, then those students could appeal because they've not been given the opportunity to do this course that's clearly beneficial, which is one of the reasons why we weren't for everybody. So, but it didn't mean that there was nothing to compare against.
Early warning system, we're still in development for that at Glasgow. We're trying very hard. There's new software that apparently we're getting soon, which AWSP will plug into that as a way of kind of flashing up to our advising teams. Maybe this person didn't engage, maybe this person hasn't logged onto Moodle or whatever. That will all kind of pull into. The dream is, the idea is, the promise is that it will all pull into one place. So we'll see if we get there.
Okay. Now that you mentioned Moodle, I'm just going to take up Jonathan's question, who is pointing out that you mentioned that you're using a lot of Moodle, and one of the challenges is that students, maybe this is the first experience of a BLE. Do you still think that Moodle is the best tool for this kind of support? Jonathan is one of our LTAs, so that's the question.
No and yes is my answer. So how do I answer this? No, in that I hate Moodle, because I think anybody that uses Moodle at any point hates Moodle. But yes, in that there is nothing better that I have seen. I don't think we have anything that can do this in a super sparkly, fantastic way that beats it out. So if that comes along, I'd be very happy to jump ship to that. So we had a long chat, for example, with the folks in Future Learn and Coursera about can they do things there that are better? No is the answer, or not yet is the answer. Other kind of third-party providers, we've had conversations with them about can they do this better? Not yet, I think is the answer. So because that's where we are.
Okay, I'm conscious of time, but we have a couple more questions, if you can. Ruth mentions this is such an interesting approach and a great achievement. Did you consider the US Writing Center approach of ongoing writing support throughout the year? Just wonder why so condensed into a few weeks.
Yeah, so AWSP is only one part of what we do. So we kind of view this AWSP as their kind of first introduction to us as a department, as a team. But we have that year-round provision. So we run again broadly subject aligned. So courses for students in the arts, courses for students in social sciences, courses for students in the medical sciences and the hard sciences. And there are year-round courses that students can opt into there on things like academic writing. There's mastering academic writing, which is a more advanced one. There's scientific writing. Presentations, lab report, any kind of forms of assessment is there all year round. And AWSP is that kind of that first chunk, and then the students go off into those optional writing center.
Another question. I wonder if some academic staff see you as the one who picks the students, and the staff academic literacy and skills are not transformed as much as they should be. But maybe this brings them into the conversation.
So the fixing the student thing, yes, for sure. I think that that oftentimes can be where the conversation starts. I think, especially for international GT students, quite a lot of the time where so the Duolingo course, for example, is probably a good example of that. Of okay, we have these students coming in, we anticipate that they will have problems, challenges, difficulties. Let's do something to fix that, to top that up. The approaches that we take are not that, because I don't like that. I don't think that's how it works. But the conversation can oftentimes start there of, my students are really struggling with this particular assessment. Can you come in and do something with them for an hour? We'll say yes, but we normally try and flip the conversation. And actually over the last, especially since AWSP became compulsory for all, we've been really able to kind of sell our wares almost to that engagement, again, in collaboration with the subject lecturers, and working kind of hand in hand with them around about their assessments, around about what the students are doing, how they're doing it, and how we embed and framework academic literacies. That's been really, really successful, but that's done on a one person to one person each time. So it's time consuming. But I think that's the only way to do that I know of.
Okay, and last question, because I'm very conscious of time. Just two people commenting in terms of marking. If you've got 60,000 students doing the course, that means 13 GTAs have to mark 44 essays per day for 10 days. But then someone is saying the work was marked automatically, so.
Yeah, so there's a balancing act here. So the multiple choice questions are all marked automatically. The GTAs do read the essays, but most of their feedback is auto-generated by just tapping in some numbers. So we're not asking the GTAs to go in and provide substantial line by line commentary. It's nothing like that. It is a marking at scale process. It is a factory almost, but we do it in as collegiate a way as possible, where the team work together to do this, and it's as automated as possible without going down any path of actually removing humans from looking at the essays and providing feedback on that. But it's all about tapping in numbers, which doesn't take long that generates that.
We have a lot of thank you comments for your talk. A bunch more questions, but I'm sure that you can all get in touch with Andrew, who's been talking for an hour non-stop. Bless you. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you for the presentation. And we look forward to seeing all of you in our next seminars, hopefully. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We're not on mute yet.